Okay, this is the second video, so make sure you've watched the first video. I'm picking up right where I left off. As he reached each entrance, he thrust one hand into a bag he wore slung over his shoulder, pulled out a roll of papers, and tossed it into the entrance. It might have been Denny's or Sandy or any one of hundreds of boys with a newspaper route in any one of hundreds of towns back home. And yet, as with the children playing ball and jumping rope, there was something wrong with it. The rhythm of the gesture never varied. The paper flew in identically the same arc of each doorway, landed in identically the same spot. It was impossible for anybody to throw with such consistent perfection. Calvin whistled. I wonder if they play baseball here. As the boy saw them, he slowed down on his machine and stopped, his hand arrested, as it were about to plunge into the paper bag. What are you kids doing out on the street? He demanded. Only route boys are allowed out now. You know that. No, we don't know it, Charles Wallace said. We're strangers here. How about telling us something about this place? You mean you've had your entrance papers processed and everything? The boy asked. You must have if you're here, he answered himself. And what are you doing here if you don't know about us? You tell me, Charles Wallace asked. Are you examiners? The boy asked a little anxiously. Everybody knows that our city has the best central intelligence center on the planet. Our production levels are the highest. Our factories never close. Our machines never stop rolling. Added to this, we have 5 poets, 1 musician, 3 artists, and 6 sculptors, all perfectly channeled. What are you quoting from? Charles Wallace asked. The manual, of course, the boy said. We are the most oriented city on the planet. There has been no trouble of any kind for centuries. All Camazotz knows our record. That is why we are the capital city of Camazotz. That is why Central Intelligence is located here. That is why it makes its home here. There was something about the way he said it that made a shiver run down up and down Meg's spine. But Charles Wallace asked briskly, Where is this Central Intelligence Center of yours? Central, the boy corrected. Just keep going and you can't miss it. You are strangers, aren't you? What are you doing here? Are you supposed to ask questions? Charles Wallace demanded severely. The boy went white, just as the woman had. I humbly beg your pardon. I must continue my route now, or I will have to talk my timing into the explainer. And he shot off down the street on his machine. Charles Wallace stared after him. What is it? He asked Meg and Calvin. There was something funny about the way he talked, as though he weren't really doing the talking. You know what I mean? Calvin nodded thoughtfully. Funny is right. Funny peculiar. Not only the way he talked either, the whole thing smells. Come on, Meg pulled at them. How many times was it she had urged them on? Let's go find father. He'll be able to explain it all to us. They walked on. After several more blocks, they began to see other people, grown-up people, not children, people walking up and down and across the streets. These people ignored the children entirely, seeming to be completely intent on their own business. Some of them went into the apartment buildings. Most of them were heading into the same direction as the children. All these people came to the main street from the side streets. They would swing around the corners with an odd, automatic stride, as though they were so deep in their own problems and their route was so familiar that they didn't have to pay any attention to where they were going. After a while, the apartment buildings gave way to what must have been office buildings, great stern structures with enormous entrances. Men and women with briefcases poured in and out. Charles Wallace went up to one of the women, saying politely, Excuse me, but could you please tell me? But she hardly glanced at him as she continued on her way. Look, Meg pointed ahead of them. Across the square was the largest building they had ever seen, higher than the Empire State Building, and almost as long as it was high. This must be it, Charles Wallace said. They're Central Intelligence, or whatever it is. Let's go on. But if Father's in some kind of trouble with this planet, Meg objected, isn't that exactly where we shouldn't go? Well, how do you propose finding him? Charles Wallace demanded. I certainly wouldn't ask there. I didn't say anything about asking, but we aren't going to have the faintest idea where or how to begin to look for him until we find out something more about this place. And I have a hunch that that's the place to start. If you have a better idea, Meg, why, of course, just say so. Oh, get off your own high horse, Meg said crossly. Let's go into your old Central Intelligence and get it over with. I think we ought to have passports or something, Calvin suggested. This is much more than leaving America to go to Europe, and that boy and the woman both seem to care so much about having things in proper order. We certainly haven't got any papers in proper order. If we needed passports or papers, Mrs. Whatsit would have told us so, Charles Wallace said. Calvin put his hands on his hips and looked down at Charles Wallace. Now, look here, old sport. I love those three old girls just as much as you do, but I'm not sure they know everything. They know a lot more than we do. Granted. But you know, Mrs. Whatsit talked about having been a star. I wouldn't think that being a star would give her much practice in knowing about people. When she tried to be a person, she came pretty close to goofing it up. There was never anybody on land or sea like Mrs. Whatsit the way she got herself up. She was just having fun, Charles Watt said. If she'd wanted to look like you or Meg, I'm sure she could have. Calvin shook his head. I'm not so sure. And these people seem to be people, if you know what I mean. They aren't like us, I grant you that. There's something very offbeat about them. But they're lots more than ordinary people than the ones on Uriel. Do you suppose they're robots? Meg suggested. Charles Wallace shook his head. No, that boy who dropped the ball wasn't any robot. And I think the rest of them aren't either. Let me listen for a minute. They stood very still, side by side, in the shadows of one of the big office buildings. 6 large doors kept swinging open, shut, as the people went in and out, looking straight ahead, paying no attention to children whatsoever. Charles wore this listening, probing look. They're not robots, he said suddenly and definitely. I'm not sure what they are, but they're not robots. I can feel minds there. I can't get at them at all, but I can feel them sort of pulsing. Let me try a minute more. The 3 of them stood there very quietly. The doors kept opening and shutting, and the stiff people hurried in and out, walking jerkily like figures in an old silent movie. Then abruptly, the stream of movement thinned. There were only a few people, and these moved more rapidly, as if then the film had been sped up. One white-faced man in the dark suit looked directly at the children and said, "Oh dear, I shall be late," and flickered into the building. He's like the White Rabbit, Meg giggled nervously. I'm scared, Charles said. I can't reach them at all. I'm completely shut out. We have to find Father, Meg started again. Meg, Charles Wallace's eyes were wide and frightened. I'm not sure I'll even know Father. It's been so long, and I was only a baby. Meg's reassurance came quickly. You'll know him. Of course you'll know him. The way you'd know me even without looking, because I'm always there for you. You can always reach in. Yes. Charles punched one small fist into an open palm with a gesture of great decision. Let's go to Central Intelligence. Calvin reached out and caught both Charles and Meg by the arm. You remember when we met, you asked me why I was there, and I told you it was because I have a compulsion, a feeling that I just had to come to that particular place at that particular moment? Well, yeah, sure. I've got another feeling, not the same kind, a different one, a feeling that if we go into that building, we're going into terrible danger. Okay, now I want you to open up your notebooks and write down the notes that I have highlighted here and add them. I added in after Meg's fault that she also got glasses from Mrs. Who, and that the happy medium showed the children Meg's mom, who was sadly writing letters to her husband, and Calvin's mom, being mean, and the people on Camazotz do things in the exact rhythm. And the main idea of this chapter is everything is the same. Okay? If you have finished both video 1 and video 2, you may read or work on your vocab homework. Don't forget, vocab is due tomorrow. Thank you guys. Have a great day.